Most people believe injustice always comes loud, aggressive, and obvious. They imagine villains shouting orders, cruelty wearing a clear face, and evil announcing itself without shame. But here's a truth that almost no one likes to face. The most damaging injustices usually arrive calmly, disguised as logic, efficiency, and common sense. They don't scream, they explain. And that's exactly why so many good people end up accepting them without resistance. Think about it for a second. How many times have you seen someone discarded, not because they were bad, but because they were no longer useful? A worker replaced after years of loyalty. An elderly person slowly ignored. A relationship valued only while it was convenient. Society doesn't call this cruelty, it calls it practicality. And that's where the danger lives. This story begins right there, not with a miracle, not with heroism, but with a decision that makes absolutely no sense in a world obsessed with results. An employee with almost nothing chooses to buy what everyone else has already condemned. An old bull, weak, unproductive, a loss waiting to happen. And while others laugh, mock, and calculate costs, one man quietly chooses dignity over logic. At first glance, it looks like foolishness, and that's intentional. Because this story isn't meant to comfort your expectations, it's meant to challenge them. It asks an uncomfortable question. What if the very things we discard are the ones capable of saving us later? What if value doesn't disappear just because profit does? If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been judged for caring too much, if you've ever been told you were too soft for this world, then this story is already speaking to you, not as entertainment, but as a mirror. Because beneath the bull, beneath the farm, beneath the conflict, there's a message about identity, worth, and the silent power of integrity. This isn't a story about animals, it's a story about people, about systems that reward speed over wisdom, about how doing the right thing often isolates you before it elevates you, and about how true strength rarely looks impressive while it's being built. So as you listen, I invite you to do something simple but powerful. Don't rush. Let the moments breathe. Pay attention to the quiet decisions. They matter more than the dramatic ones. And if, at any point, you recognize yourself in this journey, don't ignore that feeling. That recognition is the beginning of transformation. If stories like this speak to you, stories that go deeper than surface motivation and challenge how we see value, justice, and character, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Sometimes the right story reaches the right person at the exact right moment. And now, let's begin where the world usually looks away. At the moment, something is deemed no longer worth saving. There was something about that old bull standing in the corner of the corral that most people didn't notice, and yet it said everything about how the world works. His body was thin, his movements slow, his eyes tired in a way that only time can produce. To the owner of the farm, that bull was no longer an animal. He was a number that no longer added up, a cost, a loss, a mistake that should have been corrected as soon as possible. And here's the dangerous part. The farm owner didn't see himself as a villain. In his mind, he was being practical, rational. It's just business, he would say, as if those three words could erase responsibility, compassion, or conscience. Keeping a bull that no longer produced strength or profit felt, to him, like bad management. And that's how injustice often enters our lives, quietly, wearing the mask of logic. Manuel, on the other hand, saw something different. Where others saw waste, he saw a life still breathing. Where the owner saw a liability, Manuel saw dignity. He didn't romanticize the situation. He knew the bull was old. He knew it was weak. He knew it would demand time, care, and resources he barely had. But something inside him refused to accept that usefulness was the same thing as value. And that distinction changes everything. If you've lived long enough, you've seen this pattern repeat itself everywhere. Employees discarded the moment they stopped being productive enough. Elderly people treated as burdens because they no longer contribute financially. Relationships that last only while someone is convenient. Society rarely says it out loud, but it operates under a brutal rule. You matter as long as you perform. The day you slow down, struggle, or fail, your worth is questioned. The farm owner didn't wake up that morning intending to be cruel. He simply followed a system that rewards efficiency over humanity. And systems like that don't shout, they whisper. They convince good people that cold decisions are necessary, that compassion is weakness, that mercy is bad business. Manuel felt that pressure too. He worked for that farm. He depended on that job. He understood the rules better than most. But standing in front of that bull, he made a quiet observation that many people never allow themselves to make. If I accept this logic here, I'll eventually accept it everywhere. Because once you agree that a living being can be discarded for losing usefulness, you're also agreeing that one day, when you're tired, broken, or slow, the same logic can be used against you. That's why this moment matters so much. It isn't about livestock. It isn't about money. It's about a choice that defines character long before it changes destiny. Manuel didn't argue. He didn't preach. He simply refused to look away. And that silent refusal, small, almost invisible, was already setting something in motion. Something that would soon force everyone around him to confront the real cost of treating life as a transaction. When Manuel decided to buy the old bull, it wasn't a heroic moment filled with certainty. It was quiet, uncomfortable, and deeply lonely. He stood there counting coins that barely filled his palm, fully aware that almost everything he had would be gone in a single gesture. This wasn't generosity born from abundance. It was conviction born from scarcity, and that's what made it unsettling to everyone watching. The moment word spread, the laughter followed. Not the light kind, but the sharp, humiliating kind that cuts deeper because it comes wrapped in familiarity. Men who worked beside Manuel every day shook their heads. Some laughed openly, others smiled with pity, which somehow felt worse. The farm owner didn't even try to hide his contempt. He leaned back, amused, and delivered the sentence that would echo longer than he imagined. "You're poorer in your head than in your pocket." That sentence did what humiliation always does. It tried to shrink Manuel, to make him doubt not just his decision, but his intelligence, his sanity, his worth. Public ridicule has a way of making even the strongest convictions wobble. And here's something most people won't admit. The pain wasn't about the money. It was about being exposed, about being labeled foolish in front of everyone, about realizing that choosing differently often means choosing alone. This is where many people abandon their conscience, not because they suddenly stop believing in what's right, but because the cost of standing out feels heavier than the cost of conforming. It's easier to retreat, to laugh along, to say, "I was just joking," and quietly step back into line. Society rarely punishes silence, but it almost always punishes courage. Manuel felt that pressure in his chest. He questioned himself, not once, but many times. What if they're right? What if this really is stupidity disguised as kindness? That inner dialogue is familiar to anyone who has ever followed their moral compass instead of the crowd. The doubt doesn't mean weakness, it means awareness. The difference is what you do next. He handed over the money anyway. And that act, simple, irreversible, marked a point of no return. Because once you choose integrity publicly, you can't undo it privately. Manuel knew he had just made himself a target. From that moment on, every stumble would be proof of his foolishness, every delay confirmation that the mockery was justified. That's the invisible tax of unpopular decisions. People wait for you to fail so they can feel validated. But there's a deeper layer here. When someone mocks your moral choice, they're often defending their own inaction. Your courage becomes an uncomfortable mirror. It reminds them of the moments they stayed quiet, walked away, or chose convenience over conscience. And rather than face that discomfort, they attack the person who dared to choose differently. Manuel didn't respond. Not because he had nothing to say, but because some decisions don't need defense. They need commitment. He led the old bull away under the weight of laughter, knowing that from this point forward, results would speak louder than words. What no one could see yet was that this public humiliation wasn't the end of the test. It was only the entrance. Because buying the bull was the easy part. What came next would demand something far more exhausting than money. Something no one applauds while it's happening. What followed Manuel's decision was not dramatic, impressive, or visible. There were no witnesses, no encouraging words, no sudden signs that he had made the right choice. What came next was silence, the kind of silence that tests conviction more than any insult ever could. The nights were cold. Manuel would wake before dawn, when the world still pretended to sleep, and walk slowly toward the small shelter where the old bull rested. The animal barely moved at first. Breathing was heavy, uneven. Some mornings, Manuel paused before stepping inside, bracing himself for the possibility that the bull might not have survived the night. That fear became part of his routine, like tying his boots or washing his hands. Care, in its truest form, is rarely efficient. Manuel mixed herbs he barely trusted, learned through fragments of advice passed down by older workers who no longer believed in much. He cleaned wounds patiently, even when progress seemed non-existent. Sometimes he spoke to the bull, not because he expected an answer, but because silence can feel heavier when shared. Those conversations were quiet confessions about exhaustion, doubt, and the strange feeling of choosing something that gives nothing back, at least not yet. No one saw this effort. There were no compliments, no recognition, no proof that it mattered, and that's precisely why it was real. Most people are willing to do good when someone is watching. Fewer are willing to persist when nobody is counting, clapping, or keeping score. Invisible work is where intention is purified. There were moments when Manuel questioned everything. Progress was slow, painfully slow. Days passed without visible improvement. The bull still limped, still ate little, still looked fragile. And doubt crept in during the quietest hours. What if they were right? What if this care is meaningless? These questions didn't come as attacks. They arrived gently, disguised as practicality. This is the part of growth most stories skip, the long stretch where nothing seems to change, where faith isn't rewarded with results and effort doesn't produce applause. It's the phase where many people quit, not because they stop caring, but because they get tired of caring alone. Manuel didn't push the bull to perform. He didn't demand strength. He adjusted his expectations. Some days, survival itself felt like progress, and here's a subtle truth many overlook. Not every act of care is meant to fix. Some are meant to preserve dignity, while healing takes its time. There's something transformative about tending to something fragile without guarantees. It slows you down, forces patience, strips away ego. Manuel wasn't building a miracle. He was building consistency. And consistency, though unimpressive at first glance, has a quiet way of changing outcomes over time. What no one realized yet was that this unseen dedication was reshaping more than the bull's body. It was reshaping Manuel's posture in the world, because when you learn to care without applause, you also learn to stand firm when judgment comes. And judgment, whether deserved or not, was already gathering just beyond the fence, whispered by voices that had been watching from a distance, ready to interpret silence as failure. It didn't take long for the comments to begin. At first, they came softly, disguised as concern, a raised eyebrow, a half smile, a casual remark dropped between conversations as if it meant nothing. "He's always been too soft," someone would say, shaking their head. Another voice would add, almost kindly, "That's why he never gets ahead." These words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. Judgment rarely announces itself, it seeps. Manuel felt it everywhere, in the way conversations paused when he approached, in the sudden quiet that followed his name, in the looks that lasted just a second too long. Social judgment has a peculiar cruelty. It doesn't attack directly. It surrounds, it isolates, and it convinces you that everyone sees you through the same distorted lens. The hardest part wasn't the criticism itself, it was the suggestion beneath it, that kindness is naive, that compassion is impractical, that softness is a flaw in a world that rewards hardness. These ideas are deeply embedded in social culture, passed down quietly as wisdom. And once internalized, they become cages we lock from the inside. Manuel began to question not just his decision, but his identity. What if they're right about me, he wondered. What if this tendency to care is the very thing that keeps me small? Shame works like that. It doesn't shout accusations. It whispers doubts, and those whispers are hardest to silence when you're tired. There's a particular fear that comes with being judged, the fear of looking foolish, not of failing. Failure can be hidden. Foolishness, on the other hand, feels public. It feels permanent. People forget mistakes, but they remember labels. And once someone is labeled soft, sentimental, or weak, every action is filtered through that assumption. Manuel noticed himself withdrawing, not from the work, but from people. He spoke less, smiled less, kept his head down. This is how social judgment does its quiet damage. It convinces good people to shrink, to become smaller versions of themselves in hopes of avoiding attention. Yet even in that shrinking, something inside him resisted, a subtle tension. A discomfort that refused to disappear because deep down, Manuel sensed a painful truth. Adapting to judgment might earn him acceptance, but it would cost him integrity. And that trade, once made, is difficult to reverse. What most people didn't see was that their judgment revealed more about them than about him. It exposed a shared fear, the fear of standing out, of being different, of choosing compassion when cruelty is rewarded. Manuel's decision unsettled them because it challenged the unspoken rule everyone had agreed to follow. And while the comments continued, something else began to happen quietly. Amid the judgment, amid the whispers, amid the isolation, there were small changes taking place where no one was looking. Changes that would soon make the mockery uncomfortable. Changes that would force those same voices to reassess what they thought they knew, not just about Manuel, but about strength itself. Change rarely announces itself with noise. Most of the time, it arrives quietly, almost shy, as if afraid of being noticed too soon. That was exactly how the old bull began to change. There were no sudden displays of strength, no dramatic recovery that would silence the critics overnight. Instead, there were small signs, the kind most people miss because they're looking for spectacle. One morning, Manuel noticed the bull standing a little longer without trembling. On another day, the animal finished its food instead of pushing it aside. The limp was still there, the body still fragile, but something had shifted. Not enough to celebrate, just enough to pay attention. Progress, when it's real, often feels underwhelming at first. Manuel didn't rush it. He had learned, through exhaustion and disappointment, that forcing growth usually breaks what is still healing. He adjusted the routine, refined the care, stayed consistent even when improvement stalled again. Some days felt like steps forward, others felt like setbacks, and that unpredictability tested patience more than outright failure ever could. This is where many people misunderstand transformation. They expect it to look clean, upward, and linear. But real change stumbles. It advances, retreats, pauses, and advances again. The bull's strength returned in fragments, a steadier gaze, a firmer step, a quiet alertness that hadn't been there before. To anyone passing by, it still looked like a weak animal. To Manuel, it looked like resilience learning how to breathe again. There's a lesson hidden here that applies far beyond that corral. Growth doesn't require constant validation. It requires continuity. Doing the right thing repeatedly, even when there's no clear reward, slowly builds momentum. Manuel wasn't witnessing a miracle in the way people imagine miracles. He was witnessing what happens when care is sustained long enough to take root. Emotionally, something else was changing too. Manuel felt less reactive. The whispers bothered him less. The judgment lost some of its sharpness, not because people had stopped talking and they hadn't, but because evidence was quietly replacing doubt. Nothing strengthens inner peace like seeing consistency begin to pay off, even in subtle ways. Yet the transformation wasn't just physical. The bull's presence changed how Manuel moved through his days. He stood a little straighter, not with pride, but with calm. There's a confidence that grows when you commit to something fully, regardless of outcome. It doesn't shout, it settles. Still, this progress created an unintended consequence. What begins to improve in silence eventually draws attention, and attention, especially in environments shaped by hierarchy and ego, invites interference. The bull no longer looked like a lost cause. And that shift, small as it seemed, did not go unnoticed by the one person who had once dismissed it entirely. Because when something you discarded starts to regain value, it forces an uncomfortable question. Was the mistake really in the thing, or in the way it was judged? That question was about to walk straight back into Manuel's life, carried by an offer that sounded generous, but hid a very different intention. The moment the farm owner noticed the bull's change, his interest returned, not with humility, but with calculation. What once had been dismissed as worthless now looked different. Not impressive yet, not strong enough to boast about, but no longer weak enough to ignore. And in a world driven by ownership and control, improvement often attracts attention faster than suffering ever did. The owner approached Manuel with a tone that tried to sound casual, almost friendly. A few compliments were dropped, carefully measured. "You've done well," he said, as if granting permission for progress. Then came the offer, generous on the surface, precise in its intent, enough money to ease Manuel's worries, enough to look fair, enough to tempt someone who had very little. This is how power often disguises itself, not as force, but as opportunity. Manuel listened quietly. He understood what was really being proposed. This wasn't about the bull's well-being. It was about reclaiming control over something that had unexpectedly regained value. The owner wasn't interested in the months of care, the sleepless nights, or the patience that made the recovery possible. He was interested in the result, stripped of its story, detached from its cost. For a brief moment, doubt returned. Manuel felt it in his chest. That money could solve immediate problems. It could bring comfort. It could silence the whispers. Refusing it would mean continuing to struggle. Accepting it would mean relief. This is the kind of decision that reveals priorities more clearly than words ever could. And then Manuel noticed something subtle. The shift in the owner's posture, not respect, expectation. The assumption that everything, eventually, has a price. That assumption carries a quiet insult. It suggests that integrity is temporary and values bend under pressure. Manuel declined. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't argue. He simply said no. and that single syllable disrupted the balance of the moment more than anger ever would have. The owner wasn't offended by the refusal itself. He was unsettled by what it implied, because a man who cannot be bought is difficult to manage. Refusing the offer wasn't about pride. It was about coherence. Manuel understood that selling the bull at that point would erase the meaning of everything he had endured. Integrity, once compromised, rarely returns intact. You don't just lose an object when you sell it, you lose alignment with your own choices. The tension between them thickened. The owner smiled less. His tone cooled. Power does not like resistance, especially when it comes from someone it once considered insignificant. And that shift marked a turning point. What had been indifference was becoming irritation. What had been dismissal was turning into threat. Manuel sensed it. When authority is challenged quietly, it rarely responds quietly in return. The refusal wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the invitation to a deeper test, because when money fails to regain control, force often tries next, and the same system that once ignored the bull was now preparing to reclaim it, not through negotiation, but through accusation. When persuasion failed, the tone of the world around Manuel changed. Quietly at first, then with growing boldness. Power rarely retreats with dignity. It regroups. The farm owner no longer spoke directly. He didn't need to. Accusations began to travel faster than truth ever could. Small comments became formal complaints. Concerns turned into reports. And suddenly, Manuel found himself defending not a choice, but his right to make one. The first accusation sounded almost reasonable. The bull is dangerous, someone said. Old animals are unpredictable. The second was more serious. He's keeping livestock without authorization. Each claim carried just enough plausibility to feel legitimate. That's how persecution often works. It dresses itself in paperwork, procedure, and concern for safety. Manuel felt the pressure tighten around him. People who once mocked him now watched in silence. Some avoided his eyes, others nodded along, relieved that authority had stepped in so they wouldn't have to choose a side. Fear has a way of making neutrality feel like wisdom. An official order followed. The bull was to be confiscated, sacrificed for the good of the farm. The phrase stung more than the command itself. For the good of whom? The system that had discarded the animal once already. The ego that couldn't tolerate resistance, or the convenience of erasing a reminder that compassion can disrupt control. This was the final test, not of patience, but of resolve. Manuel understood the weight of what was happening. This wasn't about the bull anymore. It was about submission. Accepting the order would restore peace. Fighting it would escalate the conflict. Silence would cost him everything he had stood for. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He stood his ground with the quiet certainty of someone who has already counted the cost, and that frightened those around him more than anger ever could. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who refuses to be moved by fear. What few people realize is that doing the right thing doesn't protect you from injustice. It often exposes you to it. Integrity shines a light where darkness prefers routine. And when exposed, systems react defensively. As the situation escalated, tensions spread through the farm. Whispers turned anxious, rumors multiplied, and then, as if summoned by the weight of it all, nature intervened, not gently but decisively. The sky darkened, rain fell harder than expected. The ground softened, then gave way. Water surged where it wasn't meant to. What began as a conflict of authority was about to transform into something far more urgent. Because when real danger arrives, titles lose their meaning. And the same bull once labeled a threat was about to face a moment that would redefine everything, not through argument, but through action. The rain didn't arrive as a warning. It came as a force, heavy, relentless, swallowing the ground faster than anyone expected. What had started as a tense standoff over authority and control was suddenly interrupted by something no one could command. Water rushed through paths that had always seemed safe. The farm, so carefully organized by hierarchy and rules, revealed its fragility in minutes. Panic spread, voices rose, orders were shouted, then ignored. In moments like that, power rearranges itself. Titles stop mattering, wealth offers no protection, and fear becomes the great equalizer. It was then that the children were noticed, trapped near the lower fields, cut off by rising water. Their cries pierced through the confusion, sharp and desperate. People froze, some ran in circles, others shouted instructions that led nowhere. The distance was too dangerous, the current too strong. Hesitation took hold, and hesitation cost time. And that's when the bull moved. No one expected it, not from an animal once labeled useless, unstable, and unworthy of saving. The old bull stepped forward with a strength that didn't announce itself but demanded attention. His movements were firm, deliberate. The same legs that once trembled now pressed against the flooded ground with purpose. Instinct took over where fear paralyzed reason. Manuel didn't shout commands. He didn't push. He trusted what he had quietly rebuilt. Together, man and animal moved toward the water. The bull entered first, steadying himself, becoming a living anchor against the current. One by one, the children were guided across, clinging not to force, but to stability. Silence fell, not the awkward silence of judgment, the reverent kind, the kind that follows when reality overturns assumptions in real time. The people watching didn't cheer, they stared, because cheering would have required admitting something uncomfortable, that they had been wrong, about the bull, about Manuel, about what strength actually looks like. The farm owner stood among them, frozen. The same man who had ordered the animal's destruction now depended on it. The same system that tried to erase value was being saved by what it had discarded. Redemption, when it arrives like this, is impossible to ignore. The bull emerged from the water exhausted but standing, alive, useful, not in the way profit defines usefulness, but in the way life does. Manuel rested his hand on the animal's neck, not in triumph, but in gratitude. There was no pride in his expression, only quiet confirmation, and in that moment, the narrative shifted permanently. The labels no longer held weak, useless, foolish. They collapsed under the weight of evidence. What had once been mocked now stood at the center of everyone's survival. But the most powerful transformation hadn't happened in the water. It happened in the witnesses, in the realization that value is often revealed only when it's almost destroyed, and that the cost of discarding what seems weak is sometimes paid in ways no one anticipates. What remained now was something far more difficult than survival: reckoning. Stories like this don't end when the danger passes. They end when the lesson is either absorbed or ignored, and that choice, quietly, always belongs to the person listening. What happened on that farm wasn't extraordinary because a bull saved lives. It was extraordinary because it exposed something most people spend a lifetime avoiding: the truth that value is often invisible until it's almost lost. The bull didn't change in the moment of crisis. The world's perception did. And that distinction matters more than it seems. Ask yourself honestly, how many times have you dismissed something or someone because it didn't appear useful at the time? How many times have you walked past potential, loyalty, kindness, or even your own calling because it didn't promise immediate results? These decisions don't feel dramatic when we make them. They feel practical, sensible, safe. But safety has a hidden cost. Manuel didn't win because he was smarter, richer, or stronger. He won because he stayed consistent when no one was watching. He chose integrity when it isolated him. He cared when care seemed inefficient, and that's the part most people overlook. Life doesn't reward intention, it rewards persistence aligned with principle. This story invites a personal reckoning, not with others, but with yourself. Where in your life have you been tempted to trade conviction for convenience? Where have you accepted silence instead of standing firm because resistance felt uncomfortable? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, what have you labeled as useless simply because it demanded patience? Change doesn't require dramatic gestures. It begins with small, deliberate actions. You can start by reassessing how you treat people who can't offer you anything in return, by committing to one responsibility you've been neglecting because progress felt too slow, by choosing consistency over visibility. These aren't grand acts, but they are transformative ones. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop chasing validation is often the moment your actions gain real power. When you act from alignment instead of applause, you build something that doesn't collapse under pressure, something steady, something trustworthy. So let me ask you directly and answer honestly, even if only to yourself. What would change in your life if you stopped measuring worth by usefulness? Who might you see differently? And what part of yourself have you been quietly discarding? If this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade into another moment of reflection without action. Engage with it. Write a comment, sharing what part resonated most. These conversations matter, not because they're public, but because they make intention tangible. And if you believe messages like this deserve more space in a world that rushes past meaning, then subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and share this video with someone who might be standing at a crossroads of their own. Helping this channel grow is how we keep stories like this alive, stories that challenge, restore, and remind us of what truly matters. Because in the end, the real question isn't whether the bull was worth saving. It's whether we are brave enough to recognize value before the flood forces us to.